Welcome to part 3 of this bass sound design tutorial. In part 1, we covered how to make the main bass patch. In part 2, we covered how to make the sub bass patch. Now in part 3, we're going to come back to our main bass patch, and we're going to start putting a whole bunch of effects after massive to be able to fill out the sound. Now getting this greasy, wide, neurofunk, drum and bass kind of sound requires a lot of processing. You can't do this just in massive. Even though massive is a very good synth and it has built-in effects, you can't really achieve this exact sound just using massive. A lot of it, easily 50% of the sound of this patch, comes from the effects that we have after the synth. So I'm going to go through these one by one for you guys and A/B them, show you what it sounds like with, without, show you the settings and all the tips and tricks that I used to create this bass. The very first effect after massive is a saturator. The saturator is a fantastic device. It's one of my favorite devices in Ableton, and it adds in some nice analog warmth to it. Some harmonics, some distortion. Depending on what settings you use, it can be mild or it can be wild. So here's the saturator. You can see in this case I'm using just a couple dB of drive. I'm using the sinoid fold algorithm here, and I'm using it about 60% wet. And you'll notice I also have soft clip on, so this has added another instance of analog clip to the output. Here it is without, and with, without, and with. Following the saturator is simply an EQ8. You'll remember from the previous video we have a sub layer in this, which means we need to knock all the sub out of this. We don't need any sub coming from the main bass patch. And as well, the reason why I don't like running any sub from the main bass is subsequent to this, we're going to be running it through a whole bunch of effects like phasers and flangers and vocoders and filters, and you don't usually put that stuff on your sub. It just messes things up. So I want the sub running clean, which means I'm going to knock the sub out of this main patch. That's the purpose of the EQ8 here. All right, here's where things get interesting, the vocoder. The vocoder is one of the really fun and deep aspects of this sound. And in order to demonstrate what I'm doing here, I'm actually going to leave this main one deactivated, and I'm going to grab a fresh one and put it right next door. And I'm going to pop through step by step and show you exactly what I did. Now, a vocoder is traditionally used to make a synthesizer talk. You know, that's the kind of cliched vocoder use. You put it on a synth lead and you feed a vocal track into it and it creates a talking synth lead. We're not using it like that in this case. So normally where a vocoder would go is the vocoder would go on the vocal track as an insert. And then it would select an external carrier, which would be the synth lead. In this case, we're putting it as an insert on our bass. And under carrier, we're going to select modulator, which means it's effectively just running on itself. We're also going to turn on the enhance, which is going to give us a bit more high frequencies. Okay, now we go down to this little window right here, and the first thing we're going to change is the number of bands. You can see by default it's set to 20. It really doesn't work very well on bass unless you knock the number of bands down to like 4 or 8. So in this case we're going to choose 4, and let's just check what it sounds like. Okay, listen to it with more bands. Let's listen to this, okay? Very different sound. So we're just going to use 4 bands. Now what we can do is we can restrict the range of it. So we're going to knock the top end of the range down to about 9K, and we're going to knock the bottom up to about 150 hertz. Okay? Now, one of the core parameters that's going to give us an interesting sound is modulating the bandwidth of each band. So each band is knocked in here by filters. So there's filters on either end of it that are boxing in the band. And the bandwidth of these filters will change their width. So we can go from 0, or 10% here, all the way up to 200%. Okay, so let's play this and watch what happens to the sound. Okay, so that's a core parameter that we're going to be modulating. Now, the next piece is getting it to sound like it's talking. And that is where this parameter, the formant parameter, comes in really handy. The formant parameter will give it a kind of a talking sound. Check this out. So it's kind of difficult to get those types of sounds from a lot of other effects. So the vocoder is a very interesting animal to use here. So I can delete this guy now that I've walked you through it. And what I'm going to explain now is what is happening with the modulation. You can see there's a little green dot on the bandwidth, and you can see a little green dot on the formant. And what that means is both of those parameters have been macroed to a macro knob on the front of our instrument rack. And I'm actually using clip envelopes to be able to modulate both of those parameters. So if we go inside the clip here and we go to the instrument rack, macro 1, you can see I've drawn in a whole bunch of clip automation here in these clip envelopes. And what they're doing is moving that knob, which is in turn moving every parameter that's assigned to it. And in this case, you'll see downstream, I have even more effects that are also mapped with the different parameters to that macro knob. So let's activate this vocoder now, and I'm going to listen to it with you guys, and you can check out, you'll be able to watch the bandwidth moving and the formant moving, and you can hear what it sounds like now. That's with, without. Next in our chain of effects, after the vocoder, is a phaser. If we turn our phaser on, you can see that what I've done here is I have macroed the color parameter and the feedback parameter to that same macro knob as with the vocoder. So every time that macro knob is automated with the clip envelope and moves, it's going to be moving these parameters as well. That's why I really like using macro knobs in instrument racks. I think that they're a very powerful feature that sometimes gets overlooked because, say for example, I design my whole bass patch and I draw in all those clip envelopes, and then later on I want to add in another effect and I want to automate the parameter on that effect. I can do it so easily by just going back into macro map mode, like this, map mode. I can click on, say, the saturator here. Say I want to now modulate the dry wet. I can click on that. I can click on the macro knob. And now that dry wet on the saturator is going to follow all the movements of that macro knob. I'm just going to undo that because in this case I don't want to do that, but it's a very, very, very powerful feature. Okay, so let's come back to our phaser. So we've got color and feedback being moved by that macro knob. So let's go without and then with. Okay, next up is our flanger. The flanger again is helping to fill out the sound, helping it to give it a bit more space. It's helping to give it a bit more character. So the flanger, we can see we have the feedback turned down because where the flanger starts is it starts with the feedback really high, like up here, which gives it just, it's kind of too much of a flange sound, too obvious. So I like to knock the feedback down to about here. And you can see I have macroed the delay time. And here's what it sounds like without and with. So all that movement that's happening from the macro knob is now synchronized with all of our effects. Okay, next up is an overdrive plugin. Overdrive plugin here, you can see I'm giving some drive, 34%. I'm knocking some of the dynamics back, and has about 40% wet. And you can see here I'm using the filter so that I'm distorting just the top end of the frequency spectrum here. Now, there's a parameter here that's macroed as well to that first knob, and it's the tone, which is going to give it kind of a tonal characteristic. Let's listen without. And with. So that gives it quite a bit more of an aggressive sound in the top end. In the next video, we're going to dig deeper into the effects and cover the resonators and an audio effect rack that includes a whole bunch of filters running in parallel.